can, okay, you know what? Let's maintain our dialogue. We can keep talking if I go ahead and call myself a partial heretic, a partial crazy. Nope. By dialogue, what he means is the possibility to have conversation without any conversion. It's replacement theology, except there's no actual replacement. Sausage, black-eyed peas, collards. Why is the rice all red? Basically because I reheated it in hot sauce. So. Like many of my videos, this will probably be a little rambly, but the main idea here is do not let people define your conversations for you. You are true, good, and beautiful, and promoting truth, beauty, and goodness. And so you are going to do your utmost to frame the conversation truly, goodly, and beautifully. This video will feel variegated, disparate. Things will be mentioned, which you may decide to attach to other things or not, as you wish. How Anglo-Saxon am I? Anglo-Saxon enough to be Norman? As far as American history goes, as Northeastern blue blood as you can get. And as Southern Scotch-Irish as you can get. The blue blood from my mom's side, Scotch-Irish from my dad. Except that my dad's Brazilian. And the one time he visited the States in the 60s, he was not allowed on the beach because he was colored. And the blue blood thing, my great-grandmother Carter married a Jew. Richard Bernstein's dad had been born in Germany, married an Austrian Jew from Vienna. Her parents were Polish Jews. So I'm Jewish enough to have been put in a concentration camp in Germany if I had run into unfriendly bureaucrats, if I had not managed to fake the right papers. Black enough, although this would have been impossible to prove at the time, but black enough that in some states I could have been sold as chattel property. So I'm an Anglo-Latino Jew with a nice dose of Celtic and African. I have been tracking with great interest over the past few years as the church begins to respond to all the wild wokeness and to the summer of mostly peace. I've been tracking some of the not true, good, and beautiful reactions and seeing how the church responds to that. And of course, so much of the church is becoming compromised. I'm speaking about in the faithful, among the faithful. It is, I think, quite easy, particularly for young men up in their Twitter feels, to define the church that is being unfaithful as the church that's not going with them into their rabbit holes. But such is not the case. Young men in their fields are seldom to be trusted. Now, I'm not going to defend what I just said. You'll just have to notice. Isn't that what you guys say? That you've just been noticing. You're not into conspiracies. You've been noticing. Because I want to move on to say some other things. We're working back to being able to say, don't let other people frame the terms and conversations for you. Plenty of material has been made on the next couple of things I'm going to talk about, so I'm also going to lightly touch on them But, it is a tactic of the left to chivvy you into fulfilling their own prophecies, right? They're going to call you a racist until you finally say, yeah, you know what? If that's what a racist is, I'm a racist. And then they say, aha, you're a racist. We've got you. What they are defining is one thing. What you're doing may or may not be sin. But we as Christians know that racism, as properly defined, Jesus called a sin. This is just one example of where this happens. We are not going to allow people to push us into embracing sin just because they are unrelenting, just because they are badger, badger, badger. I have observed with pleasure that there has been movement. There have been voices from within my denomination, the Communion of Reformed Evangelical Churches, and other faithful denominations. And when I say faithful, a lot of that is in the framework of after World War C.
Serán salvos si creen que el Padre lo resucitó. Por eso es que me envió a decirles que el infierno es real. Cuidado sea tarde cuando empiece la Cuarta Guerra Mundial.
Wow, espera.
He dicho.
¿Cómo es posible si ni siquiera hemos vivido la Tercera Guerra Mundial?
Ya la vivieron en el 2020 y ni siquiera se dieron cuenta. Tengo que irme.
Espera.
After World War C. The lines have been drawn. Those have stayed open. So more and more has been coming out, saying things like, don't be an asshat. Don't be a racist. Don't fall into these traps that the world is setting for you. Pursue righteousness. Pursue mercy, peace, justice. Feed the widows, orphans, etc. And stop flipping out. Stop defining yourself as someone who is against instead of someone who is for the gospel. Being for the gospel does make you against many things and will bring you into combat, will bring you offensively into combat. It's actually the other attitude that's defensive. So basically, what, is this material coming out saying don't be a racist asshat? Is that the equivalent of saying, listen, when the other team goes with a small lineup, don't fall into that trap. Don't go small as well. Stay big and punish them, especially because your big men can handle. Sometimes the conversation is framed for you by people who love you. I was going to say are on your side, but here I'm actually talking about, I'm thinking of an instance in which we would not be on the same side of a particular question. But of course we are on the same side as in being for Christ. What I am referring to is framing Christian theologies in such a way as to slide the dial of normal orthodoxy in one direction or another. This came up recently with supersessionism. Supersessionism is simply the idea that the church is the new Israel. Así no más. It simply means that the church has superseded Israel. Now, I have been saying Israel. That can introduce some confusion. I could say the Jews. That could introduce some confusion as well. Israel is the more appropriate term because what we're talking about are the people with whom God has covenanted. One of the things I like to remind people of is that the church was a Jewish church. And there was the whole question, like, do we bring Gentiles in? And yes, we do. Naturally, the church has become mostly Gentiles in the last 2,000 years. The first council was in Jerusalem. The church looked to Jerusalem initially until AD 70. And this is just a regular Orthodox point of view. Now, within that, people might talk about Romans 11 and want to talk about, well, do the Jews, quote unquote, get grafted back in? Okay. Now, traditionally, the idea has been that with AD 70 and the destruction of the temple, that sort of that Talmudic Judaism is sort of not a thing as far as covenant pactual relationships go. Now, because the American church, particularly the boomer church, thinks so much about Israel and the Jews, the conversation is framed in a way that sort of forgets that, and I know you can go digging up quotes, etc. But we're going to have to look at the big picture. There's a sort of, I never even think about you thing going on here.
I feel bad for you.
I don't think about you at all.
Some Christians feel a necessity, Christians who are not dispensationalists feel a necessity to explain certain things, mostly because of an affection, of an affinity. The rest of us are over here busy not thinking about it. Even when I teach my kids without using the word supersessionism, I'm not concerned with explaining the place of the people who called themselves the Jews subsequently, who were the Jews but no longer Israel, right? So when I talk to my kids about this, it's all in the context of saying, listen, kids, the Old Testament is our text too. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is our God. Salvation was always by faith. Okay. So that I'm not thinking about trying to explain what the I'm not trying to explain any sort of timeline that dispensationalists would be comfortable with. All I care about is that I want my kids to believe that the stories of Adam and Eve and Noah and David and Jonah are their stories. Here's where the framing comes in. The position I describe, which is the default position. So there's a sort of gaslighting effect here. It's not sinister, it's wishful thinking. But suddenly it becomes hard supersessionism. Now, if you Google hard and soft supersessionism, you're going to get an article from First Things, a very good Roman Catholic theology magazine. And then you're going to say, okay, supersessionism, hard and soft, you click on that. February 2019. David Novak. Oh, that's a common Jewish last name. So you scroll to the bottom, as they often do, a sort of visiting scholars article. David Novak holds the J. Richard and Dorothy Schiff Chair of Jewish Studies at the University of Toronto. Okay, so he then defines two kinds of supersessionism, hard and soft. And the hard supersessionism prevents dialogue, but the latter does not, according to him. Hard or maximal supersessionism asserts that God has elected Christians to displace the Jews in the covenant between God and his people. Oh, so that's just supersessionism. Christianity is taken to be Judaism's necessary total successor or fulfillment. He goes on for paragraphs and paragraphs about hard supersessionism, even talks about Jewish hard supersessionists. Hard supersessionism is not an exclusively Christian problem. Many Jews also reject the theological validity of the non-Jewish Christian relationship. Their hard supersessionism is the inverse of the Christian version. This Jewish position holds not that Christianity has superseded Judaism. Instead, it is Judaism that has superseded Christianity. But how could that be? Didn't Judaism come before Christianity? Jewish hard supersessionists answer by pointing to a theological sequence rather than a temporal one. Basically, it's just people theologically getting back at each other for their mean positions. The inclusion of that shows what a stretch this little effort is. He's gone on for paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs, finally talks about soft supersessionism and the possibility for real dialogue. Now listen, by dialogue, what he means is the possibility to have conversation without any conversion. The Jewish religion, as it is propounded today, has no messianic, Davidic ambitions, and it certainly does not have what Christianity, among others, has, which is a vision for world conquest. That if everyone is a Christian, there will be great blessedness, and salvation is for Christians, so everyone should be a Christian. Other religions make total claims as well, and some don't. Judaism, as it is propounded today, does not make total claims. If your definition of hard versus soft is hard is that which shuts off conversation, then yes, indeed, we are done here. Novak talks about how it's important to be inward, inner. Okay, so this becomes a very modern, very Gnostic thing. It is important to see that the supersessionism that remains necessary stands as an inner Christian and an inner Jewish matter. That is, Christians need to be able to answer to themselves why they ought to remain Christian and not become Jewish. And we Jews need from time to time to be able to explain to ourselves why we remain Jewish and do not become Christian. But I think you should become a Christian. And if me thinking you should become a Christian and talking to you about that and talking to you about it repeatedly shuts off conversation, okay, that's fine. So you're going to call that hard supersessionism. Basically, anything that is not supersessionism, we could call soft supersessionism. It's replacement theology, except there's no actual replacement. This puts me in mind of something that happened maybe a couple of decades ago in the theological conversation that revolved around the idea of preterism. Preterism is the idea that when you read prophecy in scriptures, they have been fulfilled. That when Jesus said he would raise it up in 3 days, that he did, that when this generation shall not pass away, that in fact that generation did not pass away, that fleeing to the hills was about the destruction of Jerusalem. And, not just the gospel prophecies, right? But seeing fulfillment in Christ. So you read Daniel and you see, oh yes, I see this is about Christ and his kingdom. Now, preterism is not some sort of sovereignty-killing, spirituality-killing theology. Okay? It is possible to interpret prophecies on more than one plane. We enjoy our medieval theologians for that very reason, because they have way too many planes. It's just that the default reading is always, look way, way, way in the future. Oh, and I guess, by the way, we can see that way that it was fulfilled before, in AD 70 or whatever. Now, it did happen that some fringe people, just so you know, I mean, I've been a preterist for over half my life. Basically, as soon as I became aware of it, to use that label, I've only ever met one person who is what might be termed a hyper-preterist. Okay? Someone who believes that all things have been fulfilled to the point where there may not even be a second coming of Christ. It's a sort of John Lennon, no hell below us, above us only sky, optimistic eschatology, wildly heretical. Somehow, preterists let that be called preterism by taking on the term partial preterism, because they wanted to separate themselves from some lunatic fringe. No. Don't let people define you into a box, basically define you into a place that makes you seem like a radical, that gaslights you into being outside of orthodoxy. All Christians have been supersessionists for 2,000 years. Ignore the little dispies. Read the ancients on what they thought of the destruction of Jerusalem and its significance. Argue from a position of strength. Use the framing and the naming that grants you that position of strength. You truly believe these things because they're true, good, and beautiful. You believe they are biblical. So assume that position. And don't let people who also believe that their position is biblical, don't let them slide you off with clever little play about words. No, I do not accept the label hard supersessionist. I'm a regular old supersessionist. And if you say you're also a regular old supersessionist, then that's what we're going to argue about. No, I'm not a partial preterist. I'm a preterist because being a preterist isn't crazy. And if you are going to be crazy and call yourself a preterist, we're going to argue about that. If you are going to say all preterists are crazy, we're going to argue about that. But I'm not going to accept a label where we can, okay, you know what? Let's maintain our dialogue. We can keep talking if I go ahead and call myself a partial heretic, a partial crazy. Nope, not partial. I am a preterist and taint crazy. All right, so don't let people do that to you. Don't let it sneak up on them, okay? Don't let them sneak up on you. Okay. I hope this has been enjoyable. Would love to hear your comments. Peace of Christ be upon you.
What day is it today? Remind me.
It's Sunday, Mr. Pension.
Sunday. And what do we do on a Sunday morning, wherever we happen to be? We go to church, you bloody heathen!